While the minority of the homeless population suffers from mental illness, there is nonetheless a significant overrepresentation of severe and chronic mental illness in the homeless population. In the general population, usually around 1% of the population has schizophrenia, and about 6% of the population suffers from a combination of the severe mental illnesses, most notably schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, and very severe depression. However, depending on the study and the estimate, you can say that anywhere from a fifth to a third of the homeless population suffers from severe chronic mental illnesses. And then either independent of or comorbid with major depressive disorder, bipolar disorder, and schizophrenia are the substance use disorders. Substance use is very overrepresented in the homeless population as well, both as a means of trying to deal with the other mental illnesses or as a disorder in and of itself. Schizophrenia is a general term that probably accounts for multiple similar but slightly different illnesses at a genetic or molecular level. The hallmark of schizophrenia, though, is psychosis, which is a combination of hallucinations, of delusions or false beliefs, and impairment in thinking. And it's probably better thought of as the schizophrenias, in that there's probably a host of different genetic and other insults that can conspire to create this condition.
Almost all of the complications of this illness are misunderstood or distorted by the general population. Some of the most burdensome symptoms only specialists are familiar with.
So schizophrenia, at one level, is a disorder of sensory perception and of sensory gating. Sensory gating pertains to the way that we focus our attention on the senses that are the most important at the time and what's most relevant within that sense. For example, in theory, you might be concentrating more on my voice right now than the ambient noise that we might hear outside the building. However, with people with schizophrenia, sometimes there's an equal access to all sensory experiences. So there's a difficulty in the brain to target or focus on the most relevant sensory stimuli. So my voice in the conversation might have equal opportunity with the other ambient noises or other things that we hear around the building. That obviously is clouding and quite a challenge to navigate the world where all the sensory input may be getting equal time on stage.
Imagine having just this one symptom of the illness, and you're not speaking to an individual person in a quiet room. Instead, you're in a loud, chaotic urban setting where you're surrounded by gigantic buildings. The sounds of cars are honking and whizzing past you, the annoying pounding and drilling of construction. There is music from a far-off radio. Trucks are unloading their deliveries. Perhaps it is raining, and the pattering of droplets on the streets are echoing off of everything. There are pedestrians, birds, trains, sirens, vendors, and on top of all of this, a frustrated person is speaking to you. Maybe they think they're trying to help you in some way. Imagine you couldn't tune out any of the other sounds around you. That individual's voice has no more significance than any of the other noises. And that's just one of the symptoms.
In some ways, the city becomes the worst possible environment for someone suffering with this illness. They are bombarded by strangers. They have a tremendous need to be both flexible and conforming through hundreds of interactions in just the course of one day. Contrast that with a village setting, even in an underdeveloped nation, but where your community usually ends up about 250 or so people, and that's who you're going to interact with.
That's why people with schizophrenia do better in third world countries than they do in America. because they aren't excluded and intolerant. They have ways of staying within their families, staying and having roles, being able to herd sheep or do around stuff.
You're going to interact with them every day. They all know you. You know them. These things help the functioning of someone struggling with schizophrenia. And it's one of the rare instances where you might sometimes be better off having an illness in a place with far fewer resources than when you think of the resources that in theory, the great American city should have.
Not only is the city an overwhelming place for those suffering from this illness, but some experts feel that the traditional model of care does not produce inclusive results.
My point isn't that medical model is bad and rehab and recovery and community integration is good, is can't medical things be a tool for community integration, for rehabilitation? Medicine is something you use instead of something you're forced to take. Medicine is something that promotes roles in life instead of stigmatizing you, isolates you from roles in life. And that's been my job along here, is to be a psychiatrist without taking away their humanity, without making all the people back into patients.
While there are medications that treat and contain schizophrenia, there are no treatments that cure it. So these medications, even if they optimize someone's functioning and thinking, they have to be taken for life. So far, we have not found any intervention that can be done one time or for one course, and that's it, you're done. So they have to be taken every day. And people actually have trouble adhering with almost any medication every day. I mean, if you just look at an antibiotic prescription in general, who finishes their course of antibiotics? All the strep throats and pneumonias and bronchitis. When you look at people's bottles, they've always got pills left over.
So the normal medical model says you give people meds in order to treat symptoms and illnesses. This one says you give meds in order to have a better life. What's the goal this is helping? So for example, a guy comes to see me and says, so hey doc, I'm hearing voices, can you help me? I'm like, well, maybe. Why do you care about hearing voices? What difference would it make you if you weren't hearing voices? He says, well, I'd like to date women. I said, yeah, so would I, but my wife objects. What does that have to do with hearing voices anyhow? And he says, well, every time I try to date a woman, the voices say, you're fat, you're ugly, you're stupid, you're no good, who are you fooling? She's never going to go out with you. And I get so intimidated I don't even bother to try.
The voices are typically multiple. They typically are of both genders. And they tend to not have anything very nice to say in general.
They're not supportive?
Not really. Actually, almost never are the voices supportive in schizophrenia. They're exclusively either derogatory, insulting the person, demeaning the person, perhaps undermining a nicer thing that another person just said about them. They can be command hallucinations, but again, they're never inspiring or good advice. They never tell you to start an exercise program. The voices typically are destructive.
That makes sense to me. I got it. By the way, I don't think that's your only problem in dating women. If you were like a little cleaner, that would help. If you had some money to take her out with, that would be really sweet. If you had like a place to bring her back to, or at least a car with a big back seat, you might get some. That would be good. But we can work on all this all the time. I don't have to first treat a schizophrenia in order to do these other things. We can work all at the same time.
And it's most common auditory hallucinations. Their voices. Very often in the media or in film, it's difficult to depict that in a visual medium. So we often incorporate images when we depict someone who's suffering from schizophrenia, where we see a person that might be speaking to them. But that's not really the experience for most people with schizophrenia. It's possible, but fairly rare, that anyone sees anything. What they instead hear are voices that are with them wherever they go. And this obviously is quite disconcerting.
I do have some pills that might help with these voices. And I run through a list of different pills. They all might help in different ways. They got different side effects. What would you like to try? Also, you the kind of person who likes jumping into the deep end with a big dose and see if it knocks out those voices and you got a date by next Saturday, or you want to put your toes in slowly and try a little dose and see how your body responds and take longer to get there? What do you want to do? Meaningful education, meaningful choice, so he's learning to use his meds to pursue his goals, not me forcing it for an illness he probably doesn't think he has. So he chose 5 milligrams of Haldol at bedtime. When he comes back the next time, and that in itself is an accomplishment. Only a third of people come back a second time after we do our wondrous welcoming. My first question is, did you date any women? Remember, this is about having a better life. He says, no. I said, why not? He said, well, it's your fault, Doc. He says, well, it's those pills you made me take. The pills I made you take? You mean the pills we thought might help you get a date work backwards somehow? I said, I saw you down there doing a little day labor. You had $20 in your pocket. Why didn't you ask anybody out? What happened? He said, well, it's those pills. All right, tell me what happened with the pills. He said, well, I've got to hand it to you on one thing. The voices are much quieter now. There's a little whisper back in the back of my head, and that's pretty good. But now I'm shaking so like this, and I'm too embarrassed to talk to anybody, so I certainly wouldn't ask a woman out like this. Now, as an illness treater, I did not a bad job. I got his illness, he's got less symptoms, he's got a little bit of shaking, so what? Little side effects, who cares? He does not have a better life. He's no closer to his goal. He is not going to refill this pill or take any more of it. I said we have some other choices. We can add another pill that helps with the shaking, might give you dry mouth and blurred vision. I could try a different pill that might do less shaking. Or here's a choice that only appears from a person-centered model. I can lower the medicine, intentionally making the voices a little worse and making no shaking, because that gets you closer to your goals. This isn't the State Department mental hygiene scrubbing the world clean of mental symptoms. The goal is to be as functional as possible. Once again, what do you want to do? Make another choice, come back.
It's really an unbearable illness, untreated. Fortunately, there are treatments for schizophrenia, and many patients can do pretty well. But what they require is adherence to the medications, adherence to other psychosocial treatments. That can be very hard to do. People with schizophrenia often have, there's something that, I don't know if it's as popular today, but it was always referred to as the downward drift theory. That an individual with schizophrenia just starts to drift downwards in society, that all forces are aligned to fall lower and lower. So that people are less likely to have income, they're less likely to have friends and other community contacts, they're less likely to have transportation. All these things, the poor get poorer. So even though there are treatments, how can they be accessed with no resources, with no transportation, with no people really willing to help you because they're either afraid of you or you've burnt those bridges. So it's very hard. It takes a lot to keep your social status with schizophrenia. Now, born into a circumstance where you have a community that understands the illness, that gets on it early, that helps you get the treatment, then you can work, you can have a family. I mean, all those things are still possible, except in the most severe manifestations of the illness. But you need a lot of things lined up to help you. There's no getting past that. The presence of severe mental illness, even more so when it's compounded by substance use. These are the least among us. There is no demographic that is more stigmatized, that is more on the margin than those with mental illness. And whereas mental illness can often predispose to substance use, then that combination becomes sort of this supremely condemnable population whose behaviors might be frightening. And with that element of substance use, the liability is all transferred to the individual.